Shir is dedicated to Lilu Nishmas Rachalea Bas Rav Chaim Tzvi. We've been learning about the Malach of Libun, Malabein, whitening, literally bleaching. The Tolda of Malabein is the Malach of Kibbus, is the Yisr of Kibbus, is to go ahead and launder. And we've discussed that there are three elements to the Yisr, and any one of them is going to be an Yisr D'Oraisa. The first element we discussed was the Yisr of Shriya, and the concept of Shriya, so Zehu Kibuso, that if a person goes ahead and soaks a garment, so that's going to be by itself, even without any rubbing, even without agitation, even without soap, just the soaking of the garment, if it's either B'derech Nikayon, if there's a stain on the garment, so that's going to be an Isser D'Oraisa. If you have a stain on the garment, you can certainly not soak or wet, moisten that garment for the sake of cleaning it in any fashion. That's the Isser of Shriya. Then we've discussed that you can have a situation where stage 2, there's an Isser of agitating, what the Gemara calls, and the Shulchan Aruch calls shifshuf, to agitate, to rub out the dirt in the garment. And that we just spent a lot of time last time discussing that when it comes to, even without liquid, you can have an Isser of shifshuf. That's the Isser of Mena'er Talis, that's the shaking off the dust off the talis. Machlokas Rashi, Rabbeinu Chananel, and that's what we discussed in the last shir. The third stage of the process, of any laundering process, is the concept of Sechita. Because in any kind of washing process, again, step 1 is to wet the garment. Step 2 is to agitate. And now you need to get rid of the dirty water. That's step 3, and that's what we call Sechita. The same exact thing exists when it comes to our laundry machines themselves. When we go ahead and we have our wash cycle, and then we have the agitation, the back and forth, the swishing back and forth, that's the agitation, that's what we call the shifshuf, and then at the end you have the spin cycle where you expel all of that dirty water. That is the prohibition of the Sechita. And if you take a look at the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos, we don't have the Rambam here, but the Rambam indicates very clearly that when it comes to the malacha of when it comes to the Yisr of Sechita, so Sechita is certainly also midin libun. He points out, you might recall, we made a point of this when we learned Bishul, but the Rambam equates on some level the prohibition of Sechita midin libun to the Yisr of stirring a pot when it comes to the Yisr of Bishul. What's the connection between stirring a pot when it comes to Yisr of Bishul and Sechita of Libun expressing out the water? What exactly is the connection? So I believe that the Rambam was bothered by something, because why is it that you have a prohibition of Sechita? What does Sechita have to do with Libun? After you've already applied the water, applied the soap, agitated, the garment is lichora clean. So why is it considered to be a lister of Libun to do problem? After all, at this point in time, the garment has been cleansed, is cleaned. What exactly are you accomplishing as far as laundering is concerned at this point in time? So some indeed argue, Ein Chanami. It is laundering, and it is part of the laundering process, because after you've wet and clean the garment, there's still dirty water. And when you go ahead and release, you get rid of your sochet, the dirty water, out of the garment. So that's certainly libun, because the garment is certainly cleaner now without the dirty water than it would have been when you had dirty water. So certainly Sechita is libun. But that's not how the Rambam puts it. The Rambam says he wants to know both questions. Why is it there is an Isser of Bishul when it comes to stirring a pot? That seems to be strange. After all, the pot's already on the fire. You're stirring it. What exactly is the nature of that Isser? Moreover, what's the nature of the Isser of Sechita? So the Rambam says, he equates the two, and the Rambam writes, I believe this is in Perek Yud Aleph of Hilchos Shabbos, that just like Sechita is mitzorche hakibus, it's part of the process. It is not itself necessarily laundering, but it is part of that process that goes into the kibus process. At the end of the laundering process, you do wring out the garment. That's part of the process, even if it's itself is not libun per se, is not kibus per se, but it's part of that process, an integral part of that process, the final part of that process. So that's sufficient to consider to be kibus. So too, mixing a pot, megis, says the Rambam, that's not bishul per se, but since it's part of the process, derech habishul, it's part of the bishul process, so therefore it's going to be us. You might recall that's how we explained the very, very difficult sheet of the kolbo, because the kolbo told us that there's an isser of hagasa even on food that's mevushal called sarka. Even if the food is fully cooked, you still can't stir the pot when it's omid al ha'esh, even maybe when it's in a kli rishon. Why exactly is there a prohibition? That seems to be very difficult. The Kobo seems to say that's nisur d'oraisa. How could it be nisur d'oraisa? It's mavushal called tzarcho ein bishul achar bishul. So perhaps the answer is ein achanami. It's not really bishul. You're not doing cooking. It's already fully cooked. But since this is called mitzarche habishul, it's an integral part of the bishul process. That after it's been sitting there, you stir it up, you mix it up. That's the final touch of getting the food ready for consumption. So therefore, that is called mitzarche habishul, and therefore will be prohibited. So that's the Rambam's chiddush, and the Rambam makes very, very clear that Sechita is that third element of the malacha of malaben. And what we want to do in this shir is explore a little bit deeper this idea, this isser of Sechita. Now we know, we've discussed Sechita before, and that's what we want to highlight right now. There's a fundamental difference. Sechita is a tolda of Meleches Dash. But not only is it a tolda of Meleches Dash, it's also a tolda of Meleches Malaben. That's the famous chiddush of the Balei Tosfos, most famously in Ksubis Andaf Vav Amid Aleph. And we'll take a look at this Tosfos a little bit because there are very